connection between us all. So just for a little history now, a little history lesson for you. For years, there has been very dedicated research in the field of human consciousness and psi, what they call psi, PSI research. That's research into things like psychic connections, things like distance, healing from a distance viewing, all of these things. And there's been reams of scientific research going back decades. And if you want to see some of these, some of the research, some of the newest research, but some of the older ones too, go to website Noetic, Noetic.org. The Institute of Noetic Sciences, that's their website. And just take a look around there. They have posted, research that has been done. And they sponsor research in this field, in the field of consciousness and healing, and so forth. So, as I've said, for decades, going back to the 1970s and 1960s, there's been, research done on distance healing, extrasensory perception, the ability to move objects. So, and also intuition, also, being able to see things, glimpses of the future, all of these things. And there has consistently been statistical evidence that supports the existence of these things. And that's what parapsychologists, or psi researchers as they're now called, have dedicated themselves to showing that this research has been going on. This research does exist. And this research is credible. However, the problem has always been with traditional scientists and those who consider themselves to be skeptics and debunkers. They always say that this research isn't conclusive enough to them, and that their science is skewed, so forth and so on. And they'll cite numbers and they'll cite statistics and say, well, this research skews that way, and that's maybe a little suspect. And then on the other side, researchers look at these debunkers and skeptics and say, well, he's not taking into consideration that, or he's skewing this information that we just gave him that way, and he's not looking at it the right way. And it takes me back to something my father said. My father was a statistics guy for most of his life. He loved that stuff and he lived by it. But he said to me, often, Statistics can be used to support anything. In many cases, statistics can be used to support any particular point of view. So in this battle that continues on between side researchers and more traditional scientists who don't want to accept even the possibility that this kind of thing exists, that's what's going on. And basically, well, the traditional researchers, because they're so skeptical that this exists, they raise the bar very high in scientific research for them to be comfortable to make the claim that such things exist. In other words, the same statistics that perhaps, for instance, the medical community accepts as fact that show there's a relationship between taking aspirin and heart health. The statistics that support that fact would not be enough, in their viewpoint, to support claims of psychic ability, interconnectedness, and so forth. That's because they raise the bar so high, because they're so incredulous about this actually being the case, that they want over-the-top numbers to even begin to accept that. In other words, it's not enough to have a correlation that goes beyond the possibility of chance and this is a lot of what side research is about, in viewing, for instance, from a distance, cards. That's a traditional parapsychology test. And if the number of cards that the person accurately describes goes beyond what is statistically considered to be chance, then that's considered to be statistically significant. But that is not acceptable to a lot of scientists. It's not acceptable that the person would get some of the cards. They need to get all of the cards, and they also need to be able to see through the wall into the next room. Okay, that's the kind of evidence they want, and that's why there's such controversy. There are different expectations, depending on whether you are, open to the idea of these things, or you just think that they are impossible. If you think that they're impossible, then you're going to demand huge amounts of evidence to accept it. And if you are amenable to such things, and you think that such things may exist, then you're not going to be quite as demanding as someone who doesn't want to believe it. Because the problem in accepting something like this, for a lot of people, it's not just accepting something. It's you have to change your entire worldview, your entire belief system. For some of these people, if this is proven true, if, for instance, ESP is proven as a solid fact, well, then that means that people who have built a belief system around, that not being true, all of a sudden, everything has to change. And so, obviously, there's going to be resistance to, even, the slightest proof that this might exist. And that's basically how this field has been dealt with for I guess going on 40 years now. But this is changing, and I believe it's changing in the transition era, mainly due to the broadening of consciousness and the advancements that are being made in the field of quantum physics. These advancements in quantum physics require a different scientific approach, one that some scientists will feel are less rigorous, but have to be, because the nature of what is being studied is so fluid and so interactive that the old ways of researching aren't going to be able to adequately study it. So there are people, and chief among them is a gentleman by the name of Dean Radin. I'll talk about him in a minute, and I've talked about him before on the show. He's a parapsychologist who does what they call meta-analyses. In other words, he takes all of these research results that have been done, all of these studies that have been done, and puts them together, looks at them, as a whole, to say that these studies are pointing us in the direction of our consciousness being a lot more than we know. And his belief is that the study of parapsychology is as repeatable as any scientific approach. But because of its elusive, subtle, and complex nature, it's a field of study that is difficult to replicate and which we don't really understand. And since quantum physics is now having to deal with that model, I believe that there will be changes, and it's not going to be overnight. But there will be changes in the way that we study these things, and I think those changes will allow for better models for studying things like this. Now, I mentioned, the God particle, the Higgs boson, that basically connects everything. But before that was verified, there was and still is the concept of what they call the 0-point energy. Basically, that is the idea that physical reality is made up of an infinite field of energy and information. Infinite 0 points radiating energy and information into the space-time. And this basically makes makes up tiny particles, and that can only be seen by their effect on visible matter. Everything is made of the same stuff. It's all energy and information radiating from infinite 0 points within all things. Well, this is the concept we're dealing with when we talk about Higgs boson and dark matter. And from this perspective, the universe is a hologram. That means the entirety of the universe, all that exists, also exists within each little 0 point. 0 is the smallest and largest number. It's nothing and everything. And 0 point energy is the energy field that is underlying everything in the world. Everything that is manifesting. Every bit of energy that's manifesting. Now, there's controversy about the 0 point field too, and whether or not that exists. But with the breakthroughs in discovery on the Higgs boson, that is going to be, I think, listened to a lot more seriously than it has been in the past.